On February 14, 1984, Marcy Jo Andrews and two of her female friends went to a party at Casey Nowicki's apartment in Chicago. Andrews and Nowicki had never met before. The women and Nowicki got high and intoxicated. Later that day, Nowicki was driving the women home when he ran his Volkswagen Rabbit into a concrete viaduct. None of them were hurt except Andrews, whose ankle was injured. She couldn't stand on it, and it appeared to be broken. Nowicki gave his car keys and some money to the other women and told them to get his car towed while he took Andrews to the hospital. He wanted to get away from the scene before the police arrived because he was uninsured. Andrews' companions made several calls to Nowicki's apartment that night, but were only able to speak to Andrews once. She sounded confused and her speech was slurred, as if she had been drugged, and told them that Nowicki never took her to the hospital. She said she was frightened of him and wanted to go home, and asked her friends for help. That was the last time they had ever heard from her. The two women went to the apartment to return Nowicki's car keys and pick up Andrews, but were not allowed inside. They came back repeatedly over the next few days and asked to be allowed inside the apartment, saying they wouldn't return his keys until they were allowed to see Andrews. Nowicki wouldn't let them in, said Andrews had left on her own, and eventually threatened to kill them if they didn't give his keys back, which they finally did. He did let other individuals come in and out of the apartment. When police were notified, Nowicki told them the same story and denied any knowledge of Andrews' whereabouts. Andrews left almost all her belongings at home. She never picked up her last paycheck from work, and she had $91 in her bank account that was left untouched following her disappearance. Nowicki was charged with Andrews' murder in 2000 and was tried in 2005. He has an extensive criminal history, including convictions for burglary and armed robbery. Prosecutors stated Nowicki was a drug dealer in 1984, and instead of taking Andrews to the hospital to be treated for her injuries from the car, he took her back to his apartment and had her take THC until she was incoherent. One of Nowicki's friends, Michael John Panisi, testified he saw Andrews naked and handcuffed to a radiator inside the apartment a few days after February 14th. Andrews appeared to be under the influence of drugs, and Nowicki said she had taken THC and was too screwed up to be walking around the apartment. Nowicki claimed that Andrews was too high and knocking stuff over, so he had handcuffed her to the radiator. Other witnesses also saw Andrews in the apartment during that time, naked and apparently drugged. People were apparently terrified of him, and he claimed that she was a witch. Nowicki told Panisi he had tricked Andrews into taking an overdose of THC. Panisi stated he came back the day after that and found Andrews was lying dead on the floor, wrapped up in blanket or rug, and Nowicki stated she had died on me. Nowicki refused to call the police and asked Panisi to help him dispose of Andrews' body. When Panisi said no, Nowicki told him not to ever come back to the apartment. Nowicki then carried the body downstairs by himself, put it in the trunk of his mother's brown 1974 Maverick, and drove away. Another witness, who had known Andrews for several years, backed up Panisi's testimony and said he'd seen her, naked and under the influence of THC, at Nowicki's apartment on February 15th, the day after her friends last saw her. Others testified that years after Andrews vanished, Nowicki boasted to people he had violated and strangled her, and that her body would never be found. Several of the crucial witnesses against Nowicki had been offered assistance of various kinds from the prosecution in exchange for their testimony, and many admitted to criminal histories and heavy drug use. Nowicki's attorneys called the evidence against him pathetic and maintained there was no proof Andrews was even deceased. An extensive search of Nowicki's apartment and his Pulaski County, Indiana farm turned up no sign of Andrews' body. He was nevertheless convicted of rape and murder in July 2005 and sentenced to life in prison. Foul play is suspected in Andrews' case due to the circumstances involved. Her body has never been found. On Valentine's Day in 2006, Maureen Field seemed very odd and perturbed when she showed up for work at the Wells Fargo Bank in Pahrump, Nevada. She stuck in an abusive marriage to her controlling husband, Paul Fields, with whom she had an argument with before going to work that day. She was frightened and told her co-workers that something's going to happen. The next day, Maureen went missing. Maureen's husband of 15 years, Paul Fields, says he last saw her at 8 a.m. on February 15, 2006, at their home in Pahrump, Nevada. Maureen didn't arrive at work by 8:30 a.m. as scheduled, and after waiting 20 minutes, her co-workers called Paul. He said he thought she had left for work. After getting off the phone, he went directly to the police station. Paul later claimed he attempted to report Maureen as a missing person at this time, but the police wouldn't accept a report because she hadn't been gone for 24 hours. The police said, however, that Paul said nothing about a missing person and only asked if there had been any accidents involving a green Hyundai. On February 16th, Maureen's green 2004 Hyundai was found in Inyo County, California, about 12 miles from the Nevada state line. It had been stuck in the sand in a desert area about 125 feet off the road. Her keys were in the ignition, the driver's seat was fully reclined, and her purse and other belongings, including a knotted pair of pantyhose, were left behind. On the ground, there was an empty Xanax pill bottle and blanket stained with blood and vomit. Authorities initially believed Maureen wandered off into the desert and committed suicide. An extensive search of the area turned up no sign of her, however, and no suicide note was recovered. DNA from an unidentified male was subsequently discovered on items at the site of the abandoned car. Investigators stated they believed the scene had been staged by whoever was responsible for Maureen's disappearance. Authorities believe foul play was involved in Maureen's case, and for years, they focused on Paul as their prime and only suspect. Maureen's family claims the marriage was very troubled, and she wanted a divorce. One of Maureen's friends described Paul as a jealous, domineering husband and stated Maureen was afraid he would kill her. She told many people she was afraid of Paul, but she denied any physical abuse. Paul maintains his innocence in his wife's disappearance. He stated that just before she left the house the day she vanished, Maureen said, "I might as well do it now. Why wait?" He also claimed Maureen had been draining thousands of dollars from their joint accounts prior to her disappearance, and he believed she had a gambling and drug problem. She normally handled the couple's finances, but after Paul found out about the missing money, he told her he was going to start checking their bank and credit card statements from now on. Paul said Maureen took two $7,000 cash advances off their credit cards prior to her disappearance and withdrew $2,000 from their joint bank account. He theorized she staged a suicide and ran away rather than face up to what she had done. He also said he had evidence that Maureen had asked a third party to kill him prior to her disappearance, an allegation police do not believe. Police checked into the couple's finances after Maureen disappeared and said Paul's statements were inaccurate and his wife only took one $4,000 cash advance off a credit card. She used the money to pay off another card. Paul allowed the police to search his house and property several times. He initially consented to a polygraph, but later refused on the advice of his attorney. He stopped cooperating with police in Maureen's disappearance. After waiting the required 90-day period following Maureen's disappearance, he went to court to get her name taken off their jointly owned land, claiming abandonment. In an effort to keep Paul from getting her assets, Maureen's father attempted to become her legal guardian. In response, Paul dropped his claims that Maureen abandoned her property and changed her status to a missing person. While she was legally missing, he could not divorce her. He had her declared legally dead in 2009 and was named executor of her estate. The investigation went in an entirely different direction in the fall of 2012, when DNA from another man, Keith Holmes, was found on the knotted pantyhose left near Maureen's car. He was in his mid-70s at the time of Maureen's disappearance, and a registered sex offender with 2 prior convictions for child molestation. He was arrested in June 2011 for trying to lure a 12-year-old girl into his car. At the time of his arrest, he lived in Pier Blossom, California, over 200 miles from Pahrump. Investigators know he was in the Pahrump area in 2006, however. Holmes died in a prison hospice in April 2014. He claimed he'd met Maureen and slept together and left her alone afterwards. He also stated he knew Paul, but he didn't provide any further information about Maureen's disappearance. He was questioned repeatedly by the police in his final days, but he had dementia and was often not lucid. Paul Fields continues to be the prime suspect in his wife's disappearance, but the actual details of what happened remain unclear. David Sims, a former British police officer, was known for his excessive violence while on the job. To make matters worse, his anger spilled over into his personal life as well. He went through 3 marriages, each ending in divorce, with his wives citing his violent temper and alcoholism as the reasons for the divorces. Due to his violent temper, David eventually was forced out of the police force and went through a couple of failed jobs, including running a bar and a furniture business. In search of a 4th wife, he joined an international dating agency aimed at connecting men with women in the Philippines. It was in the Philippines that he met China Rose, 31, who was 20 years younger than him. They were married on Valentine's Day in 1988 and came back to the UK as husband and wife. In 1991, the couple purchased a dilapidated South End house to renovate. They got a roommate, Jeffrey Paston, who was also an older male with a Filipina girlfriend, and the 4 started to renovate the home. David was still not doing well with his career, and in 1992, he and China Rose traveled to Thailand to buy items to resell in the UK, which eventually became another failed business. He operated under the name Anthony Peter Lewis, going as far as introducing himself to new people as Tony, not David. To help with the finances, China Rose got a job at a retirement home for the elderly in early 1993. But admitted to her sister Joy that every day was a struggle as David had become increasingly temperamental and violent. She told her that almost every day he would beat her, and that she wanted to leave him but had nowhere to go and no money to support herself. Joy recalls that David once said to China that he would get someone to kill her because it would be cheaper than getting a divorce. That would be one of their last conversations. On Valentine's Day 1993, the couple attended a family party where China Rose, distraught, expressed her desire to return to the Philippines to see her sick father. Despite her close family ties and frequent communication, she never contacted her family again after that day, and that party was the last time anyone can confirm she was seen alive. 2 months after the party, David dropped off the face of the earth as well. His last confirmed sighting was at his South End home about 2 months after China Rose had disappeared. He had 2 daughters from previous marriages, and although he was never close to them, he had always sent birthday and Christmas cards to them. After that, they had never heard from their father again. The eldest daughter, Linda, who claimed that her father was a bit cocky and had a terrible temper, is convinced that he is dead. In 1996, police finally made contact with David's former roommate, Jeffrey Paston, now living on an island off the coast of Manila, who admitted that, in 1994, David had contacted him and asked him to sell the house and put the £50,000 profit in an account under the name Anthony Peter Lewis. Later, a third party, who claimed to be a representative of David's, would withdraw $40,000 of that money. Paston, now destitute and living on handouts from his family in the UK, told police that he feared for his life and that heavy characters were involved in the disappearance of both Sims and his wife, though he wouldn't elaborate further. At least $10,000 of the sale proceeds remain in a British bank account in the name of Anthony Peter Lewis. There has been no attempt to access the funds. Police believe this means that Sims is either dead or has found a highly lucrative alternative source of income: heroin trafficking. One detective working on the case said, Sims had connections with the bar business in both Manila and Thailand, and it is possible he may have begun trading in drugs. If this drug connection is true, then he and/or China Rose may have been murdered as a result of this dangerous connection. Although there is a third theory that he refuses to access the money, as that could lead to him getting caught and initiate further questions about China Rose's disappearance. In 2001, police believed that David was living somewhere in the Far East under an assumed identity, but they were never able to locate him. Although China Rose's body was never found, authorities are convinced she was murdered. As of now, he is not implicated in the death of China Rose, but is definitely the primary suspect. No new leads or news have been heard since, and it seems unlikely anything will ever turn up.